Flashbacks for each generation. Terrible moments. Generation Alpha, 2012 to now. In 100 years, said Generation Alpha, my ancestors will surely look back in horror on Putin's assault on Ukraine. A terrible moment of my generation. Since the Russians invaded, over 6,900 civilians have died. Over 7.5 million Ukrainians have fled, the fastest forced population movement since World War II. And with every second, a Ukrainian child becomes a refugee. At the same time as Russia's been committing disgraceful war crimes, they've been completely destroying Ukraine's infrastructure. And as of January 2023, they've launched attacks on over 745 health centers, just a fragment of the $350 billion of damage Russia has inflicted overall. I do have some hope, though, for with the Russian economy set to shrink by 5.6% in 2023, the war has been economically as well as militarily disastrous for Russia, who, despite outnumbering the Ukrainians by 650,000 soldiers, have been unable to make any significant gains. In 2022, the Russians lost an estimated 100,000 troops and 10 senior officers. In fact, Russian aggression has only served to strengthen the unity of the international community and Ukrainians themselves, with a Gallup poll from September 2022 illustrating that 70% of Ukrainians were willing to fight until they achieved victory over Russia. And today, we've got a sponsor that'll make your taste buds dance with joy: HelloFresh. These culinary wizards will send fresh, pre-portioned ingredients and step-by-step recipes right to your doorstep so you can cook up a storm without breaking a sweat. I've been a fan of HelloFresh for a few weeks now, and man, I gotta say, their meals are amazing. Not only are they delicious, but the ingredients are also top tier and fresh as they can be. And the best part? HelloFresh is all about saving the planet, and April is Earth Month. With a 31% lower carbon footprint and eco-friendly packaging, you can feel good about what you're eating and how it's packaged. I mean, what's not to love about having fresh meals delivered straight to your door? If you want to try HelloFresh for yourself while supporting the channel, use the link in the description or hop over to HelloFresh.com and use the code POGSIMPLE APR50 for 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. So what's going to be your favorite meal? Let me know how it goes in the comments down below. Generation Z, 1997 to 2012. The civilian cost of that conflict is truly the most horrifying statistic, agreed Generation Z. The figure reminds me of a truly terrible moment in my generation, when nearly 3,000 civilians perished in a single day. On September 11, 2001, American Airlines Flight 11 and United Airlines Flight 175 were hijacked by terrorists and crashed into the World Trade Center in New York. They took the lives of 2,753 people, including 441 firefighters, police officers, and Port Authority officers, with victims ranging in ages from 2 to 85 years old. American Airlines Flight 77 was also seized and driven into the Pentagon, killing 184 people, while United Airlines Flight 93 was the last plane to be commandeered before it was smashed into a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, resulting in the deaths of 40 passengers and crew members. For an assault that had cost an estimated $500,000, the 9/11 attacks caused $60 billion worth of damage to the site of the tragedy alone, which took an additional $750 million and 3.1 million hours of labor to clean up. Today, the 9/11 death toll continues to rise, with a further 4,343 survivors and first responders having died from overexposure to toxic fumes that emanated from the 400 tons of crushed concrete, glass, and asbestos. Millennials, 1981 to 1996. That last bit is important, said the millennial, for people often forget that traumatic events can have an extraordinarily long-lasting impact. A tragic moment of my generation is similar in this regard, for even today over 38 million people are still living with the AIDS virus, a horrific disease which weakens the immune system by targeting white blood cells. Also known as HIV, the earliest documented case was linked to what is now the Congo in the 1920s, but it was only from the 1980s when I was growing up that AIDS became an epidemic of unprecedented scale, disproportionately affecting homosexual men, drug users, and racial minorities. By 1994, AIDS was the leading cause of death in males aged 25 to 44 in the US, and was responsible for the demise of many famous celebrities, including Queen frontman Freddie Mercury and movie star Rock Hudson, while by 1999, it became the #1 killer of people on the African continent. Thankfully, the development of AIDS-related medicines has improved survival rates considerably, but there's no sign it's going away soon, for 50,000 people a year still contract the virus. I think life was actually better in the past, because as of 2020, only 47.9% of millennials own their own home, as opposed to 77.8% of baby boomers, a gap that continues to grow. Baby boomers are also 10 times richer and own $54.7 trillion more, despite millennials being the largest generation. Generation X, 1965 to 1980. It's truly a testament to modern science that AIDS patients are now able to live a relatively normal life, said Generation X. But for many who were born in my era, the effects of the US-Vietnam War, which I regard as the most ghastly moment of my generation, mean that they will never lead normal lives. A catastrophe that claimed the lives of over 3 million individuals, 2 million of whom were Vietnamese civilians. One of the most hideous weapons employed was Agent Orange, a gas originally used by the military to destroy jungle hiding places and enemy crops. The mass spraying of more than 45 million liters of Agent Orange between 1962 and 1971, which contains the toxic contaminant dioxin, has been responsible for over 150,000 Vietnamese children being born with serious deformities. U.S. personnel were also affected, and of the 2.8 million veterans who were exposed, an estimated 300,000 of them have died of Agent Orange-related illnesses, such as cancer, diabetes, and Parkinson's disease, almost 6 times more than the 58,000 American troops who perished, while many of their children have also been permanently disabled by birth defects. When the war concluded in 1975, the U.S. left in their wake an environmental disaster, with herbicides resulting in the destruction of over 5 million acres of upland and mangrove forests, and 500,000 acres of crops, an area roughly the size of Massachusetts. Baby boomers, 1946 to 1964. I think the environmental impact of the Vietnam War is definitely understated, said the baby boomer. But there was a really awful moment when I was a young man when my generation believed that nuclear missiles were going to destroy every single environment on the planet. On October 22, 1962, a naval blockade was ordered on the island of Cuba after U.S. intelligence discovered the Soviet Union was stockpiling nuclear weapons. With the Soviets refusing to back down, by October 26, the U.S. military was prepared to invade Cuba and potentially ignite a nuclear apocalypse. Fortunately, after intense U.S.-Soviet negotiations, everyone let out a collective sigh of relief when de-escalation agreements were made. You were lucky, Generation X, that you only were a child during the U.S.-Vietnam War. I was actually there, but it wasn't my choice. I was one of the 2.2 million American men conscripted into the U.S. Army between 1964 and 1973, where 25% of the soldiers operating in combat zones were actually draftees. Richer people able to afford a university education could defer the draft if they were in the top half of class for academic performance. But the poorer had no such option, meaning that 80% of enlisted men in Vietnam were from working-class families. Like military service, contracting awful diseases was another inescapable part of life in my generation. Before the development of a vaccine in 1955, widespread polio outbreaks were actually extremely common. The Silent Generation, 1928 to 1945. When Hitler invaded Poland in September 1939, said the Silent Generation, we also thought the world was coming to an end. World War II was not only the most horrendous moment of our generation, but the most devastating conflict in history, witnessing the deaths of between 70 and 85 million military personnel and civilians, with the highest number of fatalities occurring in the Soviet Union, where up to 27 million died, and closely followed up by 20 million Chinese dead. The war encompassed nearly every continent of the globe, including South America, where on December 17, 1939, the British Navy successfully outmaneuvered a German battleship on the Argentinian coast in the first naval battle of the war and the only wartime engagement to happen in that part of the world. One of the worst atrocities was the murder of up to 12 million Jews, physically and mentally disabled individuals, homosexual people, Jehovah's Witnesses, and prisoners of war, who were imprisoned in over 25 Nazi concentration camps and 11,000 satellite camps as part of Hitler's monstrous final solution. Following the surrender of the Third Reich on May 7, 1945, the war reached a grisly climax with the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August, which vaporized between 129 to 229,000 Japanese instantaneously, hitting with such a force that the shadows of victims were sometimes etched permanently onto the ground. The Greatest Generation, 1901 to 1927. History always repeats, sighed the greatest generation, because humanity never learns. An estimated 20 million people perished in the most calamitous disaster of my generation. World War I, including 9.7 million soldiers, with 230 dying for every hour of fighting. While the Australians had the highest casualty rate of the entire war at 65%, the Germans lost the most men, with 2,037,000 killed or missing overall. With 1.5 billion artillery rounds fired on the Western Front alone, many other terrifying armaments were also used for the first time, such as the flamethrower, which could unleash streaks of flame as far as 40 meters. In addition, tanks were debuted at the Battle of the Somme, where the bloodiest single day of combat in the history of the British Army occurred after the deaths of 60,000 units inside 24 hours, or one man for every 4.4 seconds of fighting. Your stories and mine are surely proof that those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Let's hope, Generation Alpha, that the politicians of the world today start to remember this.